Happy Thursday morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Tropical MBA podcast. Why is it so hard to kick off the podcast, even in the 800s, Ian?
I think you said the same thing so many times that you actually start to believe it. And then you're like, oh my gosh, it's true. This is the place to grow a lifestyle business from your laptop.
That's right. That's what we're doing here. It's fun. It's productive. The outcomes are ridiculous. You can live anywhere. You can manage your own time. You can control how much money you're making. But we do face a bunch of challenges. And today we are going to talk about 10 of them that come direct from listeners. Me and you on the phone with listeners, dealing with problems anywhere from the first few $100,000s of revenue or just that we're starting to make money on the internet, all the way up to the mid and 7 figures and 8 figures. So the stories we're going to share on the show today come from a wide variety of businesses, but they all share the same thing, which is that in a lot of these cases, they were forms of what Steven Pressfield would call the resistance. Okay, so the resistance is this idea that Steven Pressfield writes about in the book, The War of Art. And he talks about the creative path and essentially that we have so much self-doubt, we have fear, shame, concern about criticism. So we self-sabotage and we procrastinate. And I think why so many people love the book is he talks about the resistance as this universal thing. It's not actually to do with you.
It's a human condition.
Yeah, it's like a facet of the universe that when you want to do something difficult, when you want to build a business, the world will conspire against you, and it will do so vis-a-vis the resistance. Okay. So one of the ways we do this, of course, there's, imposter syndrome, there's fear, but there's also procrastination. And today we're going to talk about a specific form of it, which is doing good things to procrastinate that stand in for the harder thing that would be more effective for your business. And when we were putting together the list, I think we've committed all of these crimes, so we were well qualified to talk about them. But what's so cool is just how often they come up. We can relate to them, we can point them out, and we can say, look, I'm going to put aside this supposedly good thing to focus on the goal that I have for the business and do something way, way better. And hopefully it'll come out in the list, but because they're good things, maybe they're a little bit more dangerous than just doing something that is pure procrastination. Because at least pure procrastination, you're like, well, I just didn't work on that problem because I did video games or whatever. Like the score, but like when you're sort of like convincing yourself that the thing you're doing is actually getting you to your goal, but not, it could be a little bit more dangerous, and it could distract us a little bit more than pure procrastination. So I don't know, let's go through the list of 10 things and talk about some of the stories behind them and see what we can do to find more effective ways to grow the business versus, something marginally good to grow the business. And I was just going to say, we can find this stuff, the points of resistance out so we can grow our business, right? Just wanting to grow your business, a bonus point can sometimes be a form of the resistance because you can get people off of your back, right? If you say, well, I'm just going to grow the business, everybody's like clapping along, but maybe you want to improve the business in some other way. And we had a big discussion in the DC about this. Like, man, when I tell people that I only want to work 2 hours a day and I never want to have an employee, I'm getting heat from other entrepreneurs. They are telling me I'm not ambitious enough. I think small, blah, 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 whatever. And so you just toss out the grow thing, right? Get these people off my back. I don't want to be critiqued for how I think a great business should be run.
Yeah, it's super hard, man. Not only that, you're watching the transparency through like social media and whatnot. You're watching everyone else do it too, thinking that you're like not as good. It's terrible.
So number one, and just a reminder, these are all specifically from listeners of this show and ourselves. So here we go. Number one, I'm going to expand our marketing to multiple channels finally. I've been calling this the balanced marketing diet, right? I don't want to go paleo or vegan. I want to go a little bit of everything. I'm so happy that we're finally posting on LinkedIn or that we're finally posting on Instagram or whatever that balanced marketing diet that we've been putting off for a long time is to get to. Now, why can this be a bad thing? And sure, it can be a good thing to post on all this stuff. But here's what I want to do before we just go and eat a balanced diet. I want to ask ourselves, how do customers, your best customers, arrive in your business specifically? Can we break it down and turn that into a process? The reason I think the balanced marketing diet is so appealing to founders is because the rails, how to do it, is so clear. Let's just get all those photos and put them up over here. Or let's just take all this writing, toss it into AI and put it out over here. There's a clarity around that. A lot of us haven't clarified how customers arrive in our business. So specific example, today we spoke with a founder that is doing 6-figure plus deals. So how customers arrive in the business is actually pretty complex. It involves in-person meetings. It involves relationships. It involves a different sales cycle. And guess what? There's no Instagram for that. There's no LinkedIn for that. So now what? Well, it's a multi-part process. And there's a very small group of ICPs that make all the difference for this business. So what might be the better thing to do in that case? And so I think when you've got all of these marketing platforms around us and we're having FOMO, we're seeing other people that are having success on them, sometimes we lose sight of who are the people that we need to persuade in order to make a difference.
Another way to kind of figure out if this is a good strategy or not, I think expanding into other channels, is to figure out if your competition is advertising or on these other channels too. So if you're selling something and all of your competition is on Facebook or whatever, and you think that maybe I'll be the first to go over to Instagram, especially in a larger market, if they're not over on Instagram, these bigger players than you, they've probably figured it out. They've probably gone over there and tested it. So the chance that the marketing platform is the innovation, very small, I think. The innovation is usually going to be something other than that, than just switching platforms. The other reason is it's expensive. You can't be everywhere. You're not Pepsi, you're not Coke, you're not Ford. You can't afford to advertise at the baseball game and on Amazon and on Twitter and all these things, right? The answer for lifestyle business, bootstrap businesses is rarely distribution in that sense.
And this is back to the resistance. It's a good thing. Post stuff on here, post a video over here, do this over there, send an email over here. And the potentially great and scarier thing is to push how customers happen to your business to its absolute logical end and build that out. So in the case of relationship marketing, which a lot of high-end deals happen, it's okay, well, how does a relationship happen? Okay, what are the elements of it? How many times would you talk to this person? What is the length of those conversations? How can you generate them? And now you're building out this thing that you can't just push the button and be I'm going to post this somewhere.
A lot of these businesses rely on relationships, and that's the frustrating part too. Got all these deals because of my relationships. Now I want to do what you're saying is go over to Twitter and hit the easy button. I'm just going to run some ads. I don't need these relationships anymore. Oh, it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work?
Because my business is based on relationships. Exactly.
If I can't just go over to Twitter, or if I can't just go over to Instagram or Facebook or whatever, how am I going to scale out of this situation? That's the resistance. That's where the sausage gets made. Figure that out.
So the number one form of the resistance, I'm going to expand our marketing. I'm going to get a balanced marketing diet versus maximizing whatever that fuel is that's fueling my business. All right, number two, we don't have to sell this month or this quarter because we're so busy. I think this comes up a lot for founders when it's hard to put the wings on as you're flying the airplane, right? And so when the operation gets busy, we want to organize our desks and get everything set up so we can, quote, handle more sales. My thought on this though is it avoids the fact that customers will churn, that a lot of bootstrap business innovation happens with contact with customers on the front end of the business. And so the way I worked through a client with this issue of like, I've kind of sold out here. I run a service business. Like, why would I continue to do sales? And the thing we discussed was, well, keep talking, but change the goalposts on what a sale means. Because selling is the fuel that fires the business. I would keep the calls coming and explore other ideas like changing the deliverable, making the service more efficient, raising the price. It's always better to sell when you don't have the pressure to need to sell. You're on the winning team when you come to that sales call. You're not thirsty for the sale. So maybe we double the price if they want to start within the next 30 days. Maybe we put off the project. Hey, we can get started in Q2. Maybe we sell them on something very narrow that you can actually get done. That's incredibly optimized and simple. Maybe you find more back-end providers and you're selling somebody else's stuff at that point. Maybe you're simply building a relationship and referring that person onward or learning more about their business and their challenges. Basic idea here is that I don't think it makes sense to put down the phones in most businesses at any point in time, regardless of how busy you are.
I think you're primarily in this instance talking about service-based businesses or agency-based businesses, right? Where your delivery is manpower. And so the problem is essentially like, hey, we've maxed out our capacity. I don't want to go build another pod, or like, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. What if I build up here and then the sales drop off? So we're just going to stop selling, basically, or we're going to like slow everybody's roll here. But take the call and like maybe you'll figure out like there's a more direct way to deliver the product, a more efficient way. It would almost never make sense to stop picking up the phone.
It's a great position to make those innovations. You can keep having the conversations, just change the way that you're selling. Number 3, keeping your team maximally busy. So here's what happens, especially at a time like now, when for a lot of businesses, there's disruptions happening one way or another. And you find yourself with a team member or a unit or whatever who has, you spent a lot of time hiring them, training, working with them, and now the workload has completely changed. And so what do? We find things for them to do. Now there's a new project, which is unrelated to all that previous relationship. We're finally going to do the spring cleaning that we always wanted to do. And great, we've got this person here to do it. Good, but not necessarily great. And so I think what this is often a resistance of is essentially it avoids the fact that you might not be ROIing that team member anymore. It avoids the fact that you built the team under different circumstances, because this could have happened 2, 3, 4 years ago, right? And now the business needs to be right-sized, or what you're doing is fundamentally shifted. And so instead of facing that down and asking that question, we're asking the question of what can we toss at this person to keep them busy? So in this case, I think change management is the better thing to start with. Like, is this still the right comp? Is this still the right set of projects and tasks? Are they still on numbers that matter? That's the real conversation.
We used to be back in the office. Everybody used to be back in the office. Now, most of the businesses that are listening to this show are remote businesses. And so you don't see what your team members are up to every day. And we have all kinds of mechanisms for accountability, right? Stand-ups and meetings and documents and this and that and scorecards. But the reality is you still don't see what everybody's up to every day, right?
Yep.
For some reason, in these businesses, when you don't see what everybody's up to all day, like people could stick around for weeks, months, years, and you would lose out on profitability. And I think there's a lot of different reasons why we do it. Resistance is the main reason, right? It's hard to let these people go, build relationships and all that stuff.
Well, it's interesting you bring up these more traditional industries, because like you said, they have frameworks for dealing with this stuff and the team understands that. So It's like, hey, I was furloughed. I was put on reduced time. There's no more overtime happening right now. And I think that lifestyle entrepreneurs resist those things. We want to be different. We want to be better. But this is where, for us, I think coming at it from just a purely financial perspective as a baseline is a good starting place, which is our ROI to this investment right now. And then what catches us up is when there isn't, we always think we can make something, like basically turn a quarter or a half of this person's job
Right.
into a completely new and harder job, which is, well, I could get them on this growth thing now. It's like, wait a second, they're a support person. This isn't the investment you would make in growth, but because it's right there, it represents an easy button versus doing the harder thing, which is like, hey, are you willing to work part-time for the next few months until more customers come in? Now I'm going to either earn that cash, put it in the stockpile so the company survives longer, or invest it into grow someone who's competent that I know can get it done. And then you're going to have your job back because we're going to have the growth. So it's, not bad to try and keep people busy, but fundamentally the accountability comes back to the founder and that the finances. Just like, is this money going out every month generating or supporting critical revenue for the company? If not, right sizing it is the better thing to do typically. All right, number 4, cutting a clever deal with a declining asset. Okay, so here's the scenario. This comes up very often, actually. As an entrepreneur, you have a ton of different projects going on. And you start new stuff, you got a portfolio, and one of the pieces in the portfolio starts to drop off. It could have been the thing that paid for your lifestyle for years, and so was a very important business to you. And now all of a sudden, you recognize the change. It wasn't really worth your time. You started some new stuff. But now we've got this thing that's regressing. There's 2 options. The first option is to reduce your expenses, operate it with as little expense as possible, and make sure that you earn the maximum amount of free cash flow. What a gorgeous thing. A very nice German automobile every year, and it's like, that's a good thing. Not only that, but you're keeping the asset that markets can change, things can happen, things can bump into you. So that's good. That's the one category. The next category, which I think so many of us are tempted to do, is like, well, what if I hired somebody to save it? What if I partnered with somebody? What if I packaged it, like did do an exit process, and sold it for 2x or 1.1x revenue or 1x profit, and we start seeing this as an opportunity to cut some kind of deal. I'm not saying that you can't do it. I'm just saying that over a very long time of doing this, there's almost always like a financial reason as to why you've elected not to spend your time on it.
Mm-hmm.
What if we brought in an ad partner, or a growth partner, or a full partner, or an affiliate partner? And we start going down all these paths, and it was like, oh yeah, there's a reason why you're not working on this. There's not enough money for quality people to invest their best energy in growing this. But as a founder, we didn't think like that when we started these businesses. Typically, we were like, I'm just going to work 40, 30, 60 hours a week on this thing, even though I could make a ton of money at a job, but I love it. I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to make it work and travel and all this stuff. Well, those economics can blind us from the economics of the thing we built for other parties. Maybe you could give it to somebody as a gift. And you could say, hey, if you work for 2 years and you don't mess it up, whatever, you can just have it. That might be enough to get somebody to do it. But a lot of times we are just tempted to add work to our desk to come up with clever things to do with declining assets. And I would say most of the time, the better thing to do is just maximize our income from it and minimize our input.
Yeah, this is a tough one, man, because a lot of times, like you said, it has to do with the circumstance in which it was started, meaning how much time you were able to give it back then. Maybe you weren't getting paid. Maybe the market was different too, right? Maybe a lot of things were different. Like you said, we have this forgetfulness that we stopped working on it at a certain time. And then now you see it declining and you think, well, that was my baby at one point. I can't just abandon this thing. It was my cash cow.
Right.
But the reality is that time's passed probably for that product. But the idea that you're going to run into the burning house and salvage whatever it is that's in there in the process, hopefully not get burned up, it's probably a bad idea.
Well, I like the house metaphor too. I mean, the worst thing here, by the way, is like, this thing is paying me 5,000 or 10, and I'm going to take half of that and pay somebody. If we think about the house metaphor, like you built this house, so you put a bunch of capital, human capital into it to get it off the ground. Well, now you're just making the rent money, right? And try to maximize the rent, and you have no carrying costs. So this is from a different perspective. If you take your identity out of it, which is the hard part, right? You have to realize that was then, this is now. It's a tough one to swallow, but I've been tempted down this path so many times. Like, just get somebody over here. This thing could be this. We imagine ourselves doing it, and we don't think through the finances of having somebody else do it. I wanted to roll a quick ad here because I just got off a call with the team at Remote First Recruiting, and the work that they're doing is incredible. The average placement for our clients at remotefirstrecruiting.com is 21 days. That means if you're hiring internationally, you could have your next amazing team member in just 3 weeks working with you to grow your business. They're telling me that lately, a lot of bootstrappers are hiring sales reps, bookkeepers, BDRs, SDRs, and customer success managers. And the primary region we're focused on, and the majority of these hires right now at Remote First Recruiting are coming from Latin America. So an incredible value, super high English skills, and people that can get integrated in your business in short order. So you don't have to take our word for it. You can check out our shout out in Rob Walling's amazing book, The SaaS Playbook, where he talks about one of the best places to go is remotefirstrecruiting.com. We've been doing this since 2020, whether it's project-based or long-term contracts. We can do permanent placements or contracting. We can work within your budget to get you the global talent that you need to take that next step forward in business. We hire for all kinds of roles, and getting started is super easy. Just book a 15-minute call with our head recruiter since 2020, Greg Valentine. He's an amazing guy. Actually been friends with Ian since forever, and it's a pleasure working with him because he knows what he's doing. He knows what bootstrappers want and need, and he can get that next team member in your business in 21 days. How incredible. You're just a 15-minute phone call away. And it's really fun to talk to Greg because he knows what he's talking about. So if you're curious to learn more, head on over to remotefirstrecruiting.com. Cool. I'm on number 5, Ian. I won't do it because it won't scale. I won't do it because it won't scale. I'm kind of like hanging out here because I think this is like really fertile ground, and I don't feel like I have my footing on it exactly. But here's what I know from a self-inventorying and speaking with so many listeners of this show is that we disqualify so many good business actions and ideas because of how we anticipate it will scale. And what I've noticed is that we kind of suck at knowing what's going to scale. And in our case, we thought that our job board would scale better than our recruiting agency. That's just one example we've talked about a few times on the show. On the other hand, you see people who say, look, this has got great margin for this particular thing. I can create more of it. And so I'm going to do it and figure out the scale thing when we're at scale. And I think that that's how a lot of scaled businesses get to scale. It's like gross profit. Yes. Can I do it? Yes. Let's do it. Earn the capital and then figure out scale when we're scaled. So there's another part of the resistance that says, well, why would you ever do a business that wouldn't scale? You're going to end up 2 years from now and you're not going to be able to scale. And then you're going to be pissed that you ever went down this path. And so I can relate to that too. Maybe you could say, hey, Dan, well, your recruiting agency doesn't scale. And so maybe you're wrong about this point. And maybe I am. I'm just bringing it up because it feels like the place where founders go to not do otherwise good ideas. Like, this person wants to pay me $20,000 to have this service delivered, which will cost $6,000 or $3,000 to deliver, but I don't want to do that kind of thing because it won't scale. And so
Yeah.
we don't. And so then we do something that revolves around a social media platform or something that does scale, and we have a lot harder time getting off the ground because it's much more competitive and we're capital constrained. For those of you who don't know, we have both a job board, which has 250,000 profiles on it. It's this very like scaled up platformy thing. We built custom software and there's a bunch of visitors and all this kind of stuff. And on the other hand, we have a recruiting agency, which does a ton more revenue and profit. And we spend the same amount of time on each business every month. Now, what was interesting about that scenario for us emotionally is that we were so much more excited about the job board because we thought it could scale. And we put off doing the recruiting, even though people were asking us for it and wanting to do that transaction because we didn't want to, quote, do something that didn't scale. Now, if we would have done it in a reverse fashion and just made the money from the recruiting up front, we would have lost a lot less money on the job board because we would have had that capital coming in. And at the end of the day, we would have learned the same amount. Sometimes when we say it doesn't scale, what we mean is it doesn't scale. We know everything about this market. We know what's going to happen, and we're right. But I would guess that a majority of the time we say it doesn't scale, we mean it's hard. And we use the term scale to mean easy. That's an easier business. It scales. It's easy. This doesn't scale. It's hard.
Yeah.
And so my thing is like, maybe solving the hard problem is the way to scale. Maybe, maybe not. But I guess the point of my point is, ask yourself when you're saying, does it scale? Do you really mean technically scale, or do you mean easy? And that's the resistance. Number 6, Ian, I'm going to quit my job.
Cool. Like today? Like this is the end of the podcast or what?
I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to pursue my passion. Maybe it's a little bit of a weird point to be making here, but one of the things that I've noticed with people who are looking to make the entrepreneurial leap, obviously quitting your job is it's a big deal. One of the things I've noticed, because I'm on the other side of the fence, is that a lot of businesses aren't better than jobs. If you make a high salary and live somewhere affordably, and you are learning at your job and you're around good people, that can be a much better situation than a lot of the businesses that you might start. And so I think really looking at your job as a business and breaking it down in terms of your time you're putting in, what you're getting back, what your net is at the end of the year, what you're learning, what kind of network you're building, what opportunities does it open up access to. Sometimes we'll go and we'll start a business that has worse qualities on all fronts. And then we're just getting behind on all fronts. We're getting behind financially, from a learning perspective, and from a network perspective. Because one example would be if you start an agency that's like significantly down market from what you were doing in your job, well, now the network you're building isn't as quality. Potentially, you're not earning as much money. You're risked up because if you have a bad month, you're still paying for your team, but then you're not able to sell into it, and it just gets harder. And so sometimes I wonder if people might think that quitting the job is the action to take, but the actual action is to improve your job. Is the business that you're working on better than the job? I think that's the moment to quit, when you're jumping to something better, however you're going to judge that for your particular situation. But I have seen people who race to quit in order to do something that's worse. I don't think that's a good idea. I think it's risky on a lot of fronts. I think better to endure your job. Better yet, change it. Talked about ad nauseum. It's easier to get a better job than it is to start a business. So if you're having a hard time convincing one person to hire you under better circumstances, how on earth are you going to convince 100 people to buy your product? It's the same skill set. And so, yeah, quitting your job. It's a cool milestone, but it's not the thing. The thing is creating a better job for yourself where you have more time, freedom, and flexibility. And that's hard. And so having the capital and the skills and a network from your current job is a very good way to de-risk that transition for as long as you can. Number 7, Ian, is I've got this great idea. Often, what we mean when we say a great idea is something that is overly clever and allows us to circumvent the more obvious idea that would get us directly to our stated goal. Why is obvious hard? Well, because we can see the difficulties right in front of us, whereas a great idea masks those fears and allows us to believe that our number will come up and we will get to our goals in some way that has a little less clarity. So we call this internally, start with duh, like what is the obvious thing to be doing here and why am I not electing to do it? Because the setup of most businesses is that you've already had your great idea or your good one. And the process of building a business is simply backfilling the good idea with a bunch of conventional ones, aka business processes. Business processes or systems are business ideas that are proven to work in multiple different businesses, okay? Now, your insight as an entrepreneur was a great idea. The great idea was, I was talking about this on TikTok before anybody else, or I was writing a newsletter for high net worth individuals that X number of people in this demographic read now. That was your good idea. No more good ideas needed. But it's often the case that because that's what got us started and that's what we love, that we keep throwing good ideas at the thing versus looking at the more obvious conventional idea. Here's an example. A customer who we were talking about acquisition journey. I was like, well, I don't know. I have a sales team, but I don't even really need them because everybody who reads this report that I make, they convert at this level. And so you just basically need an order taker. It's like, okay, well, how many reports are there to read? And it's like, well, 2, or 3, or, well, have we tested the limit of how many reports people will read? It's obvious, but for some reason, it's more tempting to be clever and to do something fresh and new versus simply figuring out whatever the duh option is.
There were these commercials back in the 90s. They're like, are you an inventor or an entrepreneur? Do you have the next biggest, greatest idea? And everybody in town, is like, oh man, his mom invented the golf tee.
Yes, I totally remember that. I met that guy. Yeah, I met that.
Yeah. It's just like these bands, right? All I got to do is like write 5 or 10 good songs and then just like live out my legacy on this stuff, It just doesn't happen that way. It doesn't happen from the great idea, It happens from the execution. Like you said, it's just one slightly good idea with a bunch of conventional ones around it.
We are so ideation focused, typically as founders of businesses, we stick with that rhythm. So I think the trick, and again, we're still going to do this. This is why it's the resistance. It's something you battle with all the time, but we are so enthusiastic about cool ideas. Is there a way you can be enthusiastic about a conventional idea in the way and the style in which it is executed? And great founders have a knack for that. Whereas we are going to do the duh thing, but we're going to do it our way. We're going to do it really interesting. We're going to do it with passion, with gusto, versus just keep generating new good ideas to throw onto the heap and make execution much harder, because now we got a bunch of great ideas to execute on versus just doing the duh idea with flavor and passion and great execution, as you said. Okay, Ian, number 8, just a few more to share with you here. Number 1 is just anything that falls under the category of I'm reinvesting in my business. It's a sort of a Trojan horse under which any number of bad investments can happen, because I think it's just easy to think of our businesses as like, as long as the net profit remains about the same and it's coming from cash flow, then it makes sense to reinvest. And I think that's, I guess, good. So you can always say it. But what we found when we dig into these stories is that the investments are often very poor.
Yeah.
And for example, we are building features that we are not selling, but we tell ourselves a story as to why the features are important.
Correct. They're very poor, and oftentimes they're not tracked either.
And because it's happening under cash flow, like we make 10,000, we're only investing 2 of it in this. So we allow ourselves to do it. And because we love our products. And so we want to invest in them. And all of this happens under the guise of, I'm doing something really good for the business. I'm going to have to do this someday anyway. I'm reinvesting. And it's just, I am reinvesting in my product is so often a Trojan horse for the resistance. It's just getting its way right into your P&L. And every single month, 2,000, you wake up, it's $24,000 at the end of the year. $24,000 is $2,000 a month. But because we're making 10, 15 or whatever, we don't think about the 2 and we don't recognize that we're going to wake up and it's going to be 24. And what could we have done with that?
I'm hot today, Dan, on relating this to local services-based businesses, So the plumber shows up. And he's got the same screwdrivers and, blowtorch and everything that he's had for 25 years. And you're just like, man, why don't you get some new screwdrivers? And he's like, well, if I spend $100 on screwdrivers, that means I make $100 less dollars. The screwdriver works fine. And you're like, oh, interesting. But somehow in these internet-based businesses, we're like, we got to get some new screwdrivers in here, man. What are people going to think that can't see our screwdrivers if we don't have new screwdrivers? We got to reinvest. Again, I think it's the same thing with employees that we don't see every day in these internet-based businesses. The reinvestment, you don't see it. You're not reinvesting in screwdrivers, You're reinvesting in ideas and things that you feel like could maybe go up and to the right,
That's right.
So you don't see it, so you don't feel the pain of it. If you had to put that money into your pocket, again, and then take it out to pay for whatever crazy idea you have, you wouldn't do it.
Yeah. Hence the profit first methodology is a decent way to get there. In our case, we've gotten really detailed on our monthly finances with a controller and an accountant. But I think profit first is a good way to bootstrap your mind into this. But yeah, if it's screwdriver or cash, it's a lot easier than if it's feature and marketing test and all this kind of stuff. So just be careful. When you say you're reinvesting in your business, often what you mean is you're spending money in the name of your business, and it's not the same thing. Number 9 is I'm building an audience.
Good idea.
So the reason this can be a form of the resistance is everybody agrees that building an audience is a decent thing to do, but is it the fastest way to get to the result? Because you can use the idea of building an audience. Well, everybody knows building an audience will take time, or that's the conventional idea. And so what you can do is kind of do whatever you want, and then someday it's going to pay you back. Meanwhile, you have these goals that you want to get to, but we're using the audience thing as essentially, well, we're scared. So we're going to build an audience over here, and then someday it's going to print cash and I won't have to do anything hard. So a way you can flip this upside down is when people say, well, I'm going to build an audience for this. I said, well, how about you build calls, meetings, and texts first? So in other words, there's no difference from having an audience in the primordial stage from having a call. right? A call is an audience.
Of one.
Yes, an audience of one. So you start with one, and then you say, please listen to my Instagram when you get off of this call, or whatever that is, your audience of one. And you build it by call, meetings, and texts. And the good news here is now you can understand what message resonates with that audience. And the punchline of building an audience is that ultimately that's going to resolve to things like calls, meetings, and texts. Now, sure, you can build out an advertising thing, perhaps not applicable, but I'm seeing a lot of people that are trying to build a high-powered audience for a high-ticket thing or something like that. And it's like, well, yeah, just get on calls. Like, start talking to people and don't put it off for 6 months. Everything will move more efficiently. It's like, post on Instagram and say, book a call with me here, you know? And if nobody wants to have an audience with you, then no one wants to be your audience. You know, your phone should be ringing off the hook if you're doing the right thing. And we used to do this in the early days of the podcast. So a little bit of money where your mouth is. We would talk with listeners right off the jump. We started charging them for it because, you know, we wanted to put a filter there. But yeah, if you paid us $500, we would show up and talk about your business. And it's just a way to stay in touch with your audience, to understand what kind of messages they want to hear and get immediate feedback versus like this kind of non-falsifiable, well, I think if there's like a critical mass of this audience, then like it'll matter when there's 1,000 people or it'll matter when there's 100. It's like, well, it should matter when there's one. Like one person listened, it should matter now. And I think that is the case for a good audience. So if it matters at one, then start building calls, texts, and meetings. That's how I would build an audience, especially for, you know, companies that aren't going the advertising monetization business route.
Love it.
Okay, so the final one, building out a management layer for my agency. Why is this form of resistance? So essentially what, you know, you build out a services agency, you build out these pods, and then the pods need account managers, and then the account managers need operations managers, and the operations managers need leadership team. The most legible and easy button thing is like, I'm going to sell into these like implementers, and then I'm going to get a person to manage them. And I need to sell this much to manage them. But on the phone with a lot of my clients, I've been encouraging them to consider what the business looks like without that management layer. Are there other ways we can grow our revenue and profit without dunking in an expensive management layer? Because the biggest problem with these service-based businesses is capacity risk and the margins. And so this is the opportunity. It's like, well, why are we just going to get rid of all this margin I just worked on building and give it to someone just to manage it? Why wouldn't I try to retain the margin in the business by driving innovation some other way? So that's it, Ian. Direct from listeners. These are 10 good things that can sometimes indicate to some not so bad things and some options on what we can do differently. But overall, I just think the idea of just tossing out like the one of like, well, that won't scale, you know, these kinds of things, they just do come up so often. And, you know, I'm like the number one perpetrator of this stuff. So it's interesting just to take a step back and say, am I thinking of this because it feels easy and I don't have to face anything that's challenging or scary? And just back to Stephen Pressfield's original point, the path of builders is to grow. You know, not talking about revenue and profit here. I'm talking about spiritually and personally. And there's pain associated with that path because you have to change, you have to evolve, you have to rethink things, and you have to work, you have to create. And there's a pain associated with that. Are we just going around it by taking the easy path, or are we focusing our energy and finding a way to face the growth? Now, the interesting thing about lifestyle business is we can choose when to take on that pain, and we can always choose an easier path and see if it works out. But every once in a while, you know, the more often the better, facing it down gives you self-esteem, it gives you true growth, and you get faster evolutions and improvements in your business. All right, Ian, that's it. That's the list. Let us know if you have any more or if you can relate to any of these classic signs of the resistance. That's it for this week. We'll be back, as always, next Thursday morning.
See you then.